Hi folks, this is Ms. Schosser, and I just want to walk you through this paper that's coming up, the critique, your first real assignment in this class. So I want to point out that in the announcement section I do have a sample critique format that you can use. You do not have to use this format, but it's an APA structured paper based on the headings for your rubric, which is a great way to set up your papers for success. So that's located in the announcement section, and then you all do have a great deal of information in the syllabus that specifically pertains to this assignment, and every assignment rubric is in the syllabus for you. Those instructions in the syllabus should mirror the instructions in the assignment section of the course. So you could look at either place, and having the syllabus from the beginning of the course allows you to see it right from the start and begin planning your paper as early as you want to in the class. So in the syllabus, we have information. If you scroll down, there's a lot of great information about the course, of course. And then you see the project description for assignment number 1, which is the assignment that we're working on first. So in this assignment, it is due in week 4, and it's going to do a number of things. Those things are all listed for you here. Identify problem statement or the statement of purpose of the article, describe the participants being studied, discuss sampling sizes. Each one of these things are really fine points that you need to be able to find in your research article. That's one of the reasons we look at the research articles early in the discussion area, so that you can get some feedback on whether they're really appropriate topics, appropriate nursing directed topics and research papers to begin with. And then once you know you have a research article, then you have to be able to find these things. Now remember, what you're doing is critiquing the authors. To critique means that you're going to determine whether the authors have what they're supposed to have in the paper to describe each of these, because these are all topics or items that you would want to find in a research article. So for example, if you cannot find a sample size and you believe you have a research article, then the authors have not given you enough valuable information. So you would be critiquing that by telling us that in your paper. So each one of the items that's listed in the bullet points there are really things you should be able to find in your research article. And I will tell you that if you do not feel like you can find enough of these things, you should probably let that article go and try another one. Now, having said that, you do not have to find every one of these things, and it's absolutely appropriate to say in your critique that while the authors have not addressed one or more of these items, you can go on to tell us a little bit about it. For example, nursing theory will not be found in every research article that you look at, but you do have to address in your critique whether nursing theory is there or not. So you could easily say, well, nursing theory is not addressed by the authors. Nursing theory is important for the following reasons, or possible nursing theory that could coincide with this research is blank. So it shows that you're covering the topic and that you have knowledge of the topic and that you know whether it was addressed in the research article you looked at or not. After you get through that bullet list, you see a little bit more information. You've got a research article that shows you an article that shows you how to critique a research article. You've got some other information here from Vance, Talley, Azuro, Pierce, and Christian, conducting an article critique for quantitative research. And remember, this critique does not have to be quantitative. It can be quantitative or qualitative, but you probably want to stick with one of those two types, and maybe mixed methods, because if you choose a different type of research article, it'll be more difficult to find each of the bullet points that we're going to ask you to look at, each one of those components of a research article. Additionally, if you find quantitative research and critique that, you can use that for the next project as well, because the next project, your 2-part paper, the final paper that's done in 2 parts, must use only quantitative research. So the more you can find, and you'll need more than one quantitative research articles. So the more you can find now, the better. And finding one for this assignment will allow you to use it for both assignments. So you've got a great rubric here, and a rubric is very important to tell you, of course, how you're going to be graded, what it is that will be looked at in your paper for your score. But it also helps you set up your paper in an outline format to really set yourself up for success, because you know each one of these rubric criterion are going to create a grade for you, a portion of your grade. So I recommend that you just use them as as APA headings in your APA paper. Then you're directing the reader, you're following right down through the rubric of what you're supposed to have. And truly, when we decide on the components of a paper, an APA paper, we're trying to set you up in an outline format by helping you walk through in an organized fashion how we'd like you to talk about the contents of your paper. So following down through that rubric really does help your reader, and in this case your grader, find all the areas that you're going to be graded on. So if we look at the sample paper that I put in the announcement section, you should be able to see that it matches up with the rubric that's listed for you in the syllabus area. So you see the first section of this rubric says description of the study. So I've set you up in this critique sample paper with a cover page in APA format, so you can simply save this paper with your own name on it and use it for the format for your APA papers in this class. So you're going to fill in this first page, the cover page. Remember, your cover page needs a running head on it with the words running head in front of it, and then the title that is your running head, a shortened title, all in caps there on the top for your running head. And then the subsequent pages will have just the running head in all caps. And then the title of your paper goes next, not bolded. The title then becomes kind of the APA heading for the first section, which is generally an introduction in an APA paper. So I put some information there about what you could include as an introduction to your paper. Now, what you'll see next are each one of these rubric criterion as an APA heading. So description of the study, oops, I just hit it there for us. Description of the study, and I made that a centered bolded heading and told you underneath it what should go in that section. Remember, to get full credit for each one of these sections, you have to address what's under level 3 of the rubric criterion. So, for example, in the description of the study, you're going to provide a clear, accurate comment on the title, the abstract, the introduction, and the purpose of the study. You have to address each one of those, critique each one of those to get full credit for that first section. Critiquing, of course, means that you're going to say whether the authors addressed it and whether it included what it was supposed to include. So you, for example, you might give the title of the story of the paper when it says comment on the title. Was it clear and accurate? Did the title describe what was actually found in the paper for you, give you enough information that you knew what the population and the intent of the article was? You've got good information in your reading for this week that'll help you see how to critique what it is that you should find in the research study. The purpose of the study is another item that you critique in this first section. So did the authors say what the purpose of the study was, and what was it? So it's kind of two parts. Did they tell you about it, and then what was it? So you can see a little bit more example information in the sample paper that I gave you. The second section I wrote was participants. Remember, in the participants section, you're critiquing the inclusion and exclusion criteria. That's another thing that you might not always find in a research study. So you want to go back and find it. Tell us what it was. Did the authors discuss it, and what it was, what the inclusion and exclusion criteria were. And if the authors did not discuss it, can you identify anything that would be inclusion and exclusion criteria? The sample size, when you address sample size, remember you want to not only tell us was it included in the author's article, but was the sample size adequate? How do you know if it's adequate? You should be able to find that in our reading, and you can use other available sources as well. If you're looking at a quantitative study, how would you know what the sample size should be? And if you're looking at a qualitative study, how would you know what the sample size should be? And is it or was it large enough? And other ethical considerations and consent, those things are critiqued under the participants section. Then you have the research question and the hypothesis. So to critique that information, your authors certainly may have given specific research questions that were addressed in their study. They might list several research questions, and they might not have given any research questions, but have given you enough information that you could create a research question in your mind when you're reading the study. So whichever way it is, make sure you tell us about it. The authors did or did not provide specific research questions for this study. And if they did, describe them to us. And if they didn't, you can say, while the authors did not provide research questions, a reasonable research question after reading this study would be, and then give us what you think the research question would be. Keep in mind that if you're reading a study about a survey, the research questions are not the actual survey questions. It is the research question or questions are the overarching question the authors are trying to determine by the evidence they find in their study. So it's not actual individual survey questions that we're talking about here, but the overall question that the author is trying to answer, their research question. So that section addresses the independent and dependent variables as well. So research question or hypothesis, and you might have both of those, and you might only have one, that's fine. And then independent and dependent variables, and tell us what that means. You won't always have both independent and dependent variables. You could tell us why. What did they have both and why, and why not if you did not find both of those. And then what they were, what the variables were. The next section is reviewing the methods, literature review, the methods and the results. So in this section you want to critique the author's literature review. Did they have a literature review that was specifically designated as a literature review? Or did they address numerous research studies throughout the entire paper? So it's important to identify how easy it was to find the literature the authors used to support their research. I always recommend that you tell us how many resources were used by the authors, whether they were recent. Recent resources would be within the last 5 years. So did they include recent research? And I always recommend saying the resources used by the authors in the literature review section ranged from the years, and then give the earliest year and the latest year. You can tell us how many of them there were and what topics were covered. And then the research methods used, so you specifically are going to talk about the methodology used by the authors and if they clearly described the methods used. So in this literature review, you should be telling us the overall type of research, qualitative, quantitative, maybe mixed methods, and then the methods they used to complete that study. So maybe they used phenomenological research, or non-experimental research, or experimental research, or there are just probably about 15 or 20 possible different types of research methods that you could describe there. And tell us, of course, you're critiquing, so you want to tell us how clear the authors were when they described it. The data analysis is the way that the result, or the way that the data was analyzed during the study. And that, of course, will depend on whether you're looking at a qualitative or a quantitative or a mixed method study. So be clear about, for example, if you're looking at a quantitative study, what specific statistical analysis studies were done, were described by the authors. And then the limitations of the study. Remember, if you don't find, you have to read your article truly. Truly, I recommend you read your article 3 times. The first time you're reading through to get a total idea of what the study was. Second time you're taking some notes, maybe highlighting on the paper, and the third time you're trying to answer each one of these questions as you go through. Really, and I know some of them can be a little bit dry and boring, but you've got to read through it several times to really get a feel for the study. And then limitations. If they don't tell you the limitations of the study, then you want to state that because you're critiquing it. So you want to say the authors did not describe limitations of the study. However, limitations might include, and then give some ideas for limitations. The next section is on the article evaluation. So in this section, you're looking at the level of evidence used, nursing theory, and implications for nursing practice or research. That's a lot to put in that paragraph. Remember, levels of evidence we talked about during the class material. These are specific levels of evidence based on current literature that's out there that describes different levels. There are more than one source that you can use to describe levels of evidence. You might find the level of evidence chart from the ANA, and it might have 3 or 4 or 5 different levels of evidence in it. You might use a source from that has 3 or 8 or 6 levels of evidence in it. So whatever source you use for levels of evidence, you have to tell us what source that was. You can do that with an in-text citation and a full reference as well, because it will be important to determine if you chose the right level of evidence. And the level of evidence is really based on the type of study that you're looking at. So you have to know what type of study it was to see where it falls in that chart. And that level of evidence is important because we'll make certain decisions and even practice changes based on the type of level of evidence. And if it was a low level evidence, then we might not take any action based on the research that we read. And if we had numerous studies that were high levels of evidence, we might make a practice change because of it. So you have to know how important, how weighty the level of evidence is. You know, if we talk to practice experts in our area, that is evidence. It's not research, but it's evidence. But we might not make a practice change based solely on experts that have been working in our work area for 5 or 6 years on a subject. So we might make a practice change if we brought in 5 or 7 research articles that were all high levels of evidence. So it's an important thing to know the level of evidence of the research article you're looking at. Most of your research articles will not tell you what level of evidence they are. So you have to find the source. We have sources in our reading for the week. You have to find the source, and you have to determine based on the type of research it is what level of evidence you're talking about. But don't omit that section from your critique because you'll lose points if you do. You're also talking about nursing theory. You're critiquing whether the authors wrote about nursing theory. And remember, we want to find nursing research articles. And if you don't find a nursing research article, it's doubtful that you're going to have the authors writing about nursing theory. And if they didn't write about nursing theory, be upfront about that. State that the authors did not address nursing theory in the research article, however, and then go on to tell us the importance of nursing theory, or what type of theory you might suggest to support this research study. And then implications for nursing practice or research. So really the implications for nursing practice can relate specifically to your work area. So if this topic is one that you're passionate about, and many of you have chosen a topic you're passionate about, how could you take those results back to the work area? Would they be valuable and useful there? The next section is the application to the clinical area. And this clinical area can discuss, it can overlap a little bit with that section that we just talked about in your work area, but it also needs to address the research, the implications to research. For example, is additional research recommended by the authors on the same subject, or is additional research recommended on other subjects related to yours, or using other research methods. Many times we start out research with qualitative research when we don't have a lot of information about a subject, and then we'll move on to quantitative research. Or we might do a study with both qualitative and quantitative. So what do the authors suggest for continued research about the topic you read about? And then certainly you can wrap it up with a conclusion to your paper. In the last section, of course, you want to put your reference list in there as well. Be careful to put in APA format. There's some examples here for you. Remember, you want a DOI number, and if a DOI number is not available, you want to put the URL to the home page of the journal it came from. You do not want to put the UMUC link, because that is you want people to be able to go back and find it, and if you're writing a APA paper, they won't be able to link to it from your paper to the UMUC library. So you want to put the official APA format, which is a DOI number, and if that's not available, then the URL to the home page for the journal that you're talking about. And then always go back through and spell check, just to make sure that you gave it a good once over. If you have questions about the format or the contents of the critique, I would be happy to talk to you. Please reach out and let me know, and I hope you are having a terrific week.